When a quiet little black girl pointed her finger at a police officer in a crowded courtroom, no one expected the truth she spoke to shake an entire city. Imani Carter was only 7 years old, but there was something about her that felt older than her age. Maybe it was the way she sat so quietly in class, listening carefully to everything. Or maybe it was the way she looked at people not with fear or excitement, but with quiet curiosity, as if she was trying to understand their hearts. She didn't talk much. In fact, her teacher often had to remind herself that Imani was even in the classroom. But when Imani did speak, her words were soft, thoughtful, and honest. She never said more than needed, and somehow that made everyone pay attention. Imani lived in a small neighborhood in Georgia, where the streets were cracked and the houses leaned just a little too much to one side. The walls were thin. Sirens were loud. Most nights, the silence was broken by yelling from the corner store or the deep roar of a police cruiser speeding down the road. People in the neighborhood didn't always trust the police, and the police didn't always trust them. It had been like that for years, and even the children knew something wasn't right. Imani had lost both her parents in a terrible car accident when she was just 5. Since then, she had been living with her grandmother, Miss Edna, a strong and wise woman who had seen more in her life than she liked to talk about. Miss Edna kept her home clean, her porch filled with flowers, and her heart full of love for her granddaughter. Every morning she braided Imani's hair and packed her lunch. Every evening she told her old stories from when she was a little girl. But there were some stories Miss Edna never told, stories about pain, about injustice, about how she had once marched for her rights and watched people cry because of the color of their skin. Those stories stayed locked in her eyes. One sunny afternoon, Imani was walking home from school, her backpack bouncing lightly on her shoulders. She took the longer way home because she liked the empty lot with the rusted swing set. It was peaceful there. But on this day, the peace was broken. As she passed the corner store, she heard shouting. Her small feet froze. Across the street, a man was being pulled out of a car by 2 police officers. He was yelling that he hadn't done anything wrong. His hands were up, but one officer slammed him to the ground. People on the street stopped and stared. No one moved. Some took out their phones. Others turned away. Imani ducked behind a fence, her heart beating fast. She peeked through the wooden slats. One of the officers had his knee on the man's back. The other one was shouting something she didn't understand. Then she saw another officer arrive in a different car. He walked over slowly, his face unreadable. His badge read Brooks. Stood there for a moment, watching. We didn't say anything. He didn't stop the others. After a minute, he helped handcuff the man, who now lay silent. Imani's pressed to the sidewalk. Imani's tiny hands gripped the fence. Her eyes were wide, but she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just watched. When the police drove away, the man was in the back seat and his groceries were scattered on the sidewalk. Nobody cleaned them up. Imani stood there for a long time, then walked the rest of the way home. Quietly that night during dinner, she asked Miss Edna a question. Her voice was soft and her eyes were thoughtful. "Grandma, do the police help people?" Miss Edna looked up from her plate. Her fork froze in her hand. She looked at Imani for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes they do," she said. "Sometimes they're supposed to. But sometimes they forget why they became police in the first place." Imani thought about that. Do they hurt people because they're bad? Miss Edna set her fork down slowly. She took a deep breath. "Some people wear a badge and still do wrong, baby. And sometimes people who get hurt didn't do anything bad at all." Imani was quiet. She nodded and kept eating, but the question stayed in her head. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough to feel a change inside her. The world, which had once felt simple, now seemed confusing. She didn't know what to think of the police anymore. She didn't know what to do with what she had seen. But she remembered the officer with the name Brooks. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't hit, but he also hadn't stopped it. That made her feel something she couldn't name. Over the next few days, Imani kept thinking about that moment. At school, while other kids laughed at recess, She sat on the swing, lost in thought. Her teacher asked if she was okay. She nodded. But inside, her mind kept returning to the man on the ground. The way his voice cracked when he shouted he hadn't done anything wrong. One day, at school assembly, the principal announced a new community program called Voices for Peace. It was meant to bring children and police officers together to talk, play games, and build trust. Imani didn't pay much attention. But her teacher, Miss Holloway, gently placed a flyer on Imani's desk. "I think you should go," she said. "You have something special to share, even if you don't know it yet." Imani didn't want to go. She didn't want to talk to the police. But Miss Edna told her it might be good to see things for herself. So, the next Saturday morning, Imani found herself sitting on a folding chair in a small community center. Surrounded by other kids and a few officers, she sat near the back, her eyes on the floor. Then she heard a voice. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Officer Daniel Brooks. I grew up not far from here." Imani's eyes shot up. It was him, the same officer she had seen that day. He was taller than she remembered. His voice was calm, but there was something heavy in it, like he had seen a lot and carried it all inside. He talked about his childhood, how he had grown up in a small apartment with 3 brothers and a single mom, how he had seen bad things happen to good people, how he had once been afraid of police too, how he had promised to become the kind of officer who listened. Imani stared at him, her small fingers gripping the edge of her chair. He didn't see her, kept talking, said that being a police officer was hard, that sometimes it was lonely, that people looked at him and only saw the uniform, not the person. As he spoke, Imani didn't know what to feel. Part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her remembered the man on the ground. At the end of the session, the kids were asked to draw pictures of what trust looked like. Most drew hands shaking, or hearts, or smiling faces. Imani picked up a crayon and slowly began to draw. She drew a man in a uniform. His badge had the name Brooks on it. He was holding a child's hand. The child was small, with puffy braids like hers. Then she looked at the picture for a long time. She tore it up. No one saw her do it. She placed the pieces in her backpack and left quietly. That night, Miss Edna found the torn drawing while checking Imani's homework folder. "Did you draw this?" she asked gently. Imani nodded. "Why did you tear it?" "I don't know," Imani whispered. Miss Edna didn't press her. She sat beside her granddaughter and held her close. Some things, she knew, had to unfold in their own time, and so the quiet girl in the loud world continued to watch, to listen, and to carry something powerful inside her, a voice, a truth, and a courage that was waiting for the right moment to rise. The Saturday sessions at the community center became part of Imani's life, though she never got used to them. Every week she would sit on the same metal chair close to the back, with her backpack at her feet and her hands folded in her lap. She didn't speak unless someone asked her something directly. Even then, her answers were short, almost like whispers. But she kept coming, and that meant something. Each session began with games to help the kids and police officers get to know each other. They played charades, trust walks, and sometimes even dodgeball. The other kids laughed and shouted, enjoying the break from their usual weekends. Imani didn't laugh much, but she watched everything. She watched how the officers smiled, how they high-fived the kids, how they answered questions, and she always watched Officer Brooks. She still remembered the day she had seen him on the street during the arrest. That image hadn't faded. She remembered how he had stood there, quiet, watching. He hadn't stopped the others, hadn't spoken, and yet now, here he was, tossing a basketball to a group of laughing children. He joked with them. He asked them about school and music and video games. He seemed kind. He seemed human. And that was the part that confused her. One day during a discussion circle, each child was asked to say what they thought about the police before joining the program and what they thought now. Imani sat silently, hoping the talking stick would skip her, but eventually it was passed to her. All eyes turned to the small girl with the big brown eyes. She held the stick tightly. "They scare me," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "They don't always help. Sometimes they hurt people and no one stops them." The room went silent. Even the other children didn't know what to say. "Psst," Brooks looked down at the floor. Another officer, a young black woman named Officer Diaz, nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "That's a brave truth." Imani handed the stick to the next child and folded her hands again. She felt a weight lift from her chest. For the first time, she had said how she truly felt, and no one shouted at her. No one told her she was wrong. At the end of the session, Officer Brooks approached her gently. "You were honest today?" He said, "I respect that." Imani didn't say anything. She looked at him, then nodded slightly and walked away. But inside, something was stirring. The following week, something different happened. The officers were asked to share their own childhood stories. Most of them spoke about playing sports or going fishing with their dads. Officer Brooks sat quietly for most of the time, his face unreadable. Then, near the end, he raised his hand. "I'll go," he said. Everyone turned toward him, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "I didn't always want to be a cop," he said. "When I was little, I wanted to be a firefighter. But my mom worked 2 jobs, and we lived in a tough neighborhood. One night, my older brother got jumped by some guys in an alley. He was trying to walk home from the corner store. The police didn't come for almost an hour, and when they finally did, they told my mom there wasn't much they could do." Paused. The room was silent. That night, I promised myself I'd grow up and be the kind of officer who shows up, who listens, who protects. He looked around the room, then down at his hands. "But I'll be honest with you," he added. "Not always easy. You see things, you get tired, you get scared, and sometimes you forget why you started." Imani watched him closely. She didn't understand everything he meant, but his voice didn't sound fake. It didn't seem like he was trying to impress anyone. He sounded tired, real. Later that day, the kids were asked to draw someone they trusted. Most of them drew their moms or teachers. Imani drew her grandmother. She carefully colored in Miss Edna's long gray braids, her soft eyes, and her favorite green sweater. But in the corner of the page, she drew a smaller figure, a man in a police uniform. Just standing there, not smiling, just watching. When Miss Edna saw the drawing that night, she said, "That's a strong picture, baby." Imani nodded. "He's trying," she said softly. Miss Edna didn't ask who he was. She didn't need to. As the weeks passed, something changed in Imani. She still didn't speak much, but her eyes held a little more light. She began answering questions in class, even raising her hand once or twice. Her teacher, Miss Holloway, smiled every time she saw Imani open up just a little bit more. One afternoon at the community center, Officer Brooks brought in a photo album. He showed pictures of his family, his graduation from the police academy, and even his pet dog, Max. "This is me before I wore the badge," he said, pointing to a picture of a skinny teenager in a hoodie. Same heart, same dreams, just no uniform. He passed the photo around, and when it reached Imani, she stared at it for a long time. The boy in the picture looked nervous, but hopeful. She couldn't imagine him holding handcuffs or riding. In a police car, he looked like someone who just wanted to do something good. That night, Imani wrote something in her journal, a habit she had picked up thanks to Miss Holloway. She wrote, "Maybe people can wear different faces. Maybe someone can be both good and scared. Maybe they need someone to remind them who they are." She closed the notebook and slid it under her pillow. A few days later, something surprising happened. Officer Brooks came to Imani's school to speak during Career Week. All the kids were excited to meet a real police officer. Sam asked him silly questions like whether he had ever chased someone on a rooftop or if he carried donuts in his patrol car. He laughed and answered kindly. When Imani saw him walk into her classroom, she felt her stomach twist. She didn't want to be called. She hoped he wouldn't remember her. But as he looked around the room, their eyes met. He gave her a small nod, just enough to say, "I see you." That nod made her feel safe, seen. After the talk, he walked over to her desk. "You're the only one who didn't ask me a question," he said. She shrugged. "I don't know what to ask." He smiled gently. "That's okay. Sometimes the best questions come later." Imani didn't answer, but she thought about that all day. The next Saturday at the community center, the session was different. They talked about right and wrong, about what makes a hero, about how telling the truth can be scary but powerful. One of the other kids, a boy named Malik, said, "Sometimes I see stuff, but I don't say nothing, 'cause I don't want no trouble." Everyone nodded. Officer Brooks said, "Yeah, I get that. But sometimes silence causes more trouble than truth." Imani's head lifted slowly. Sss. She looked at him, and something passed between them. A thought. A memory. A quiet understanding. Later that day, as the kids were packing up, Officer Brooks was stacking chairs. Imani walked over to him. "I saw something once," she said quietly. He stopped moving. There was a man. And to cops, they were hurting him. "I was behind a fence." He looked at her carefully. "When was this? A while ago? Near the corner store? You were there?" His face changed slightly. Not shock, not denial. Just stillness, she continued. "You didn't do anything. You just watched." He sat down on one of the chairs. "You remember that?" She nodded. He looked away for a moment, then back at her. "I should have done more," he said softly. "I should have spoken up." Imani didn't answer. She just stood there, quiet and calm. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "That takes guts." Imani looked at him for a moment. Then she turned and walked away. That night she didn't say much to Miss Edna. She went to bed early. Before sleeping, she opened her journal again and wrote, "Sometimes grown-ups need help remembering what's right. Maybe I can help." And in her own quiet way, Imani began to realize that her voice, though soft, carried a weight the world needed to hear. It was a cloudy Wednesday afternoon when everything changed for Imani Carter. She had just finished her spelling quiz at school and was walking home alone. Her backpack felt heavier than usual, and her mind was drifting. The streets were quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic. She passed the usual sights: Mr. Glenn, sitting on his porch reading the newspaper, the twins riding their bikes on the cracked sidewalk, and the corner store where she sometimes bought red lollipops. As she reached the alley near the store, she heard shouting. It wasn't the usual noise. This shouting was sharp, angry, frightened. Imani stopped and peeked around the wall of the alley. What she saw made her heart pound. A young black boy, maybe a teenager, but more than 15, was on the ground. His school backpack was open. Books spilled everywhere. Two white police officers were holding him down. One had his knee on the boy's back. The other was yelling and grabbing his arms roughly. The boy was crying out, "I didn't do anything. I was just walking home. Please." Imani froze behind the wall, her breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed fixed on what was happening. One of the officers looked around quickly, but he didn't see her. She crouched lower, hiding in the shadows, heart beating like a drum. The officers pulled the boy up and slammed him against the wall. He wasn't fighting, wasn't even moving much, but they kept shouting at him and pushing him around. One of them pulled out handcuffs. She heard someone from a nearby apartment shout, "Leave that kid alone." But the window slammed shut right after. No one came down. No one stopped them. Imani watched every second, her stomach twisted, her fists clenched. The same feeling she had the day she saw Officer Brooks during another arrest returned, only stronger. Fear, anger, confusion. After a few more minutes, the officer shoved the boy into the police car. His backpack and books were left on the ground. Imani stayed hidden until the sirens faded away. Then she walked slowly to where it had happened. She picked up a torn notebook and a library card. She read the name, Jaden Moore. She held the items close and ran home. When she burst through the door, Miss Edna stood in the kitchen, stirring soup. Imani's face was pale. Her chest rose and fell quickly. "Grandma," she said, her voice shaky, "I saw something again. And it was worse this time." Miss Edna set down the spoon and walked over, kneeling gently in front of her granddaughter. "What happened, baby?" Imani told her everything. Every word, every detail, even the boy's name from the card. Miss Edna listened silently. When Imani finished, they sat in silence for a moment. Then Miss Edna spoke. "You did the right thing by coming home, but now we need to do something more." Imani looked up. "What can we do?" Miss Edna stood and walked to the phone. "We're going to call his family." That night, Imani and Miss Edna visited the Moore family. Jaden had been released from the station, bruised and shaken, but not charged. His mother hugged Imani tightly after hearing what she had seen. "You're an angel, baby," she whispered. "They say there were no witnesses, but now we have." 1. The next day, a lawyer was at their door. He wanted to speak to Imani. Miss Edna sat beside her during the conversation. Imani told him what she saw, and the lawyer wrote everything down carefully. "This could change everything," he said. The Moore family decided to sue the police department. The news spread fast. People in the neighborhood started talking about the case. Everyone was shocked that a child had seen it happen. Some were proud, others were nervous. Some whispered that testifying against police could be dangerous. Imani was scared too, but she knew deep inside she couldn't stay quiet. Week later, she was called to testify in court. Miss Edna walked with her through the courthouse halls, holding her hand tightly. The courtroom was large and cold. The ceiling was high, and the benches were filled with people journalists, police officers, neighbors, and strangers. When Imani walked to the front of the courtroom, people stared. She looked so small next to the big table and high judge's bench. Her feet barely touched the floor as she sat in the witness chair. The lawyer stood up. "Can you tell us your name?" he asked gently. "Imani Carter," she replied, her voice clear. "And how old are you, Imani?" 7. The lawyer smiled kindly. "Do you know why you're here today?" "Yes," she said. "I saw what happened to the boy." "Jaden, can you tell the court what you saw?" Imani nodded and began to speak. Her voice was soft but steady. She told the courtroom everything: the alley, the shouting, the way Jaden cried out, how the officers handled him. She described their uniforms, their words, the sound of the siren, even the backpack and the torn notebook. The courtroom was quiet. Every word she said made people lean in closer. Then came the moment that no one expected. The lawyer asked, "Were there any other officers at the scene? Anyone you recognized?" Imani paused. Her heart beat faster. She looked across the courtroom, at the rows of officers, and then she saw him. Officer Brooks. He was sitting with the others, in uniform, watching her closely. Their eyes met. His expression changed, soft, worried, maybe even ashamed. Ima raised her hand slowly and pointed. "Him," she said. "He wasn't the one who hurt Jaden, but he was there. He saw it happen. It didn't stop them. He knows." The courtroom exploded in whispers. Some people gasped. Others turned to look at Officer Brooks. The judge banged the gavel. Order in the court. But the damage was done. Imani had spoken the truth, and everyone heard it. The judge called for a recess. People stood and talked in low voices. Porters ran to make phone calls. Some officers avoided looking at Brooks. Imani sat back in her chair, trembling slightly. Miss Edna rushed to her and hugged her tightly. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "So proud." Officer Brooks sat still for a long time. His hands were clasped together. He looked like a man who had just been hit in the chest by something powerful, not a fist, but a truth he couldn't ignore. Outside the courtroom, people talked. Some praised Imani's bravery. Others said she was just a child and shouldn't be involved. But one thing was clear: her words had shaken something deep. Imani sat quietly on a bench near the hallway. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a little girl who had told the truth, if that was all. Suddenly, Officer Brooks walked toward her. Miss Edna stood up protectively, but he raised his hands gently. "I just want to talk," he said. He knelt in front of Imani. "You were right," he said softly. "I was there. I saw it, and I didn't stop them." Imani looked into his eyes. There were tears forming. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. He lowered his head. "Because I was scared," he admitted. "Scared of what it would. I mean, scared of losing my job. Scared of going against other officers. But watching you today, I realized I was wrong to be silent." Imani said nothing. She just nodded slowly. "I'm going to tell the truth," he said. "It's because you had more courage than I did." He stood up and turned to walk back into the courtroom. Imani watched him go. Not as a police officer, not as someone in uniform, but as a person trying to fix something broken. When the court resumed, Officer Brooks stood up voluntarily. He asked the judge if he could speak. The lawyers were confused. The judge allowed it, and then, in front of everyone, he confessed, "I was present during the incident. I saw what happened. I saw excessive force used against Jaden Moore, and I said nothing." The room was dead silent. I didn't stop it. I didn't report it. And for that I am deeply sorry. Gasps filled the room. Some officers looked away. Some civilians nodded in approval. The judge asked the court clerk to document his testimony that day. Imani's voice had not only been heard, it had inspired another to speak out. A man twice her age. A man with power, a badge, and responsibilities. That night, Imani sat at the kitchen table with Miss Edna. They were quiet for a while. "Do you think it changed anything?" Imani asked. Miss Edna smiled and touched her hand. "You moved a mountain today, baby," she said, one word at a time, deep inside. Imani felt something shift, feeling she didn't have a word for yet, but maybe it was called hope. After all, the court battles and the heavy days filled with tough words and long talks, life slowly began to change around Imani. The case that had started with fear and confusion ended with a quiet, kind of hope that something better could grow, even in the hardest places. But the journey wasn't over. Not for Imani, not for her family, not for the neighborhood that had been touched by her courage. Even though the courtroom drama was behind her, Imani found herself carrying a new kind of responsibility. People now looked up to her not just as the little girl who had bravely spoken the truth, but as a symbol of hope for many who felt unheard. At school, her teachers encouraged her, and her friends started to see her in a new light. Still, things felt heavy on her young shoulders. At home, Miss Edna was always there, holding her hand through the hard nights and reminding her that she was stronger than she thought. Sometimes Imani felt tired of being brave all the time, tired of the whispers in the stairs, tired of wondering if everything would really get better. One day a special letter arrived. It was an invitation to a citywide event about justice and community. The mayor wanted Imani to speak about her experience. It was a huge honor, but also a scary challenge. Imani wasn't used to standing in front of so many people, and the idea made her heart race. Miss Edna helped her practice. Together, they wrote down what Imani wanted to say, words about truth, courage, and hope. They talked about how important it was to listen to each other and to stand up for what was right, no matter how young or small you were. When the day of the event came, Imani wore her favorite dress, a bright yellow one that reminded her of sunshine after the rain. She walked onto the stage with Miss Edna by her side. The room was filled with people from all walks of life, police officers, teachers, parents, and children like her. Imani took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice was soft at first, but grew stronger with every word. "I was just a little girl when I saw something that scared me. I saw a boy being hurt, and I knew it was wrong. I was afraid to speak up, but I did it anyway, because no one should be hurt, and everyone deserves to be treated fairly." The crowd listened quietly. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. Others nodded, feeling the power of her words. "I want to live in a world where we all listen to each other, where police protect us and families feel safe. I want to grow up knowing that being brave means telling the truth, even when it's hard." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Imani smiled shyly, but felt proud. This moment wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who wanted change. After the event, many people came up to thank her. Some promised to work harder, to make the community safer and fairer. Even some police officers shook her hand and told her they wanted to be better. But the road wasn't always smooth. Not everyone agreed with the changes. Some people felt uncomfortable or angry. Imani sometimes overheard adults talking about the problems she had caused or saying she was too young to understand. Those words stung, but they didn't stop. She kept writing in her journal, capturing her thoughts and dreams. She drew pictures of a world where children played freely, where police and families talked and laughed together, and where fear was replaced by trust. At school, Imani joined a club that worked on community projects. They planted trees, painted murals, and organized fun events to bring people together. She made new friends who believed in kindness and justice like she did. One afternoon, Imani's teacher, Miss Holloway, handed her a book about civil rights leaders. She flipped through the pages. She saw stories of people who, like her, had stood up for what was right, people who faced fear and challenges but never gave up. Reading those stories gave Imani new strength. She realized she was part of a much bigger journey, one that stretched back in time and would continue long after she grew up. Imani's story even caught the attention of a local newspaper. A kind reporter wrote about her bravery and how one little girl's voice helped change a community. The article spread across the city, inspiring others to speak out and believe in their power to make a difference. Meanwhile, Officer Brooks continued to work on rebuilding trust. He joined training programs about fairness and respect and began mentoring younger officers. His courage to tell the truth opened doors for more honest conversations within the police department. One day, Officer Brooks invited Imani and Miss Edna to visit the police station. They toured the building and met officers who wanted to listen and learn. For Imani, it was a chance to see that change could come from understanding and courage on both sides. Back in her neighborhood, things were not perfect. There were still hard days, and sometimes fear crept back. But the community was stronger. People talked more openly, helped each other, and worked together to build a safer place for their children. Imani kept growing, but she never forgot that. Allie, where she had first seen Jaden Moore, she stayed in touch with Jaden and his family. They shared stories and supported each other, bound by a shared hope for justice. Years later, Imani stood on the same courthouse steps where she had once spoken as a child. Now she was taller, confident, and full of dreams. She was ready to speak, again not just for herself, but for all the voices still waiting to be heard. Her journey taught her that even the smallest voice could make a difference. That bravery wasn't about being fearless, but about standing up in spite of fear. And that truth, no matter who tells it, has the power to change the world. Imani's story became a light for many, proof that courage and honesty can break through walls of silence and bring people together. It showed that change begins with a single step, a single word, a single act of kindness and bravery, and in the heart of a little black girl who dared to point a finger and speak the truth. Hope grew bright, strong, and unstoppable. After Officer Brooks's powerful confession in court, the whole city seemed to change, even if just a little. The story of a small girl's courage and a man's honesty spread quickly, reaching places no one had expected. Imani Carter became a symbol not because she wanted to be, but because her quiet bravery sparked something bigger than herself. The days following the trial were busy and confusing for Imani. People talked about her everywhere at school, in the neighborhood, even on TV. Some adults smiled warmly when they saw her, saying, "You're a hero, little one." But others were quieter, whispering things that made her feel uncomfortable. Some officers looked at her with cold eyes, as if blaming her for the trouble she had caused. At school, Miss Holloway made sure to protect her as much as possible. She sat with her during lunch, helped her with homework, and gently reminded other kids to be kind. But Imani noticed the way some classmates stared or whispered when she passed. She missed the days when she was just another face in the crowd, not the girl who had pointed a finger at a police officer. Still, Imani didn't regret what she had done. She knew the truth needed to be told, no matter how scary it was. One afternoon, while walking home from school, Imani saw Officer Brooks again. He was standing outside the community center, his uniform neatly pressed, but his face looking worn. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod. Imani felt a mix of emotions, sadness, hope, and something like respect. Officer Brooks wasn't the same man who had sat silently during the earlier sessions at the community center. Now he seemed more open, more honest. He had started attending meetings with community leaders, listening to families who had been hurt by police violence. He wanted to make things better, even if it was hard. In the weeks that followed, the police department faced many questions from the public and the media. The chief promised changes, promising better training and more accountability. But for many in the community, words were not enough. At home, Imani and Miss Edna talked often about what was happening. Miss Edna explained that change takes time, and sometimes it feels slow. But she reminded Imani that every step forward was important. One night, Imani dreamed about the boy she had seen in the alley, Jaden Moore. In her dream, he was walking freely, smiling, his books safe in his backpack. They were playing in a park filled with laughter and sunlight. But then the scene shifted, and she saw the officers too, some kind, some angry. The dream was confusing, but when she woke up, she felt a strange calm. The court case continued. Officer Brooks's confession inspired others to come forward. Some officers admitted to seeing or hearing things they had kept quiet about. Families shared stories of pain and loss. The courtroom became a place where truth was slowly being uncovered. Imani was called back several times to testify again. Each time, she felt nervous, but also stronger. She realized her voice mattered, that it could make a difference. Her words helped the judge understand how serious the problem was, how trust had been broken and needed to be rebuilt. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to change too. The community center became busier, with more kids and families joining. Officers started hosting more open events, listening carefully and answering hard questions honestly. Slowly, the gap between police and the people began to close. One day, during a summer event at the community center, Officer Brooks asked Imani to say a few words. She stood in front of a crowd of people, children, parents, officers, and neighbors, and spoke with a quiet but firm voice. "I used to be scared of police," she said. "But I learned that some of them want to be better. All want to be safe and treated fairly. We need to listen to each other and be brave enough to say when things are wrong." Her words were met with applause. Some faces in the crowd smiled, others wiped tears. Imani felt proud but humble. She knew there was still a long way to go. School Imani's classmates began to ask her questions, not about the court case, not about her feelings, her dreams, and what she hoped for the future. She found herself opening up more, laughing more. Miss Holloway noticed the change and smiled quietly. One afternoon, after school, Imani walked to the library. She loved to read, and it was one place where she felt calm and free. As she browsed the shelves, a librarian approached her. "Imani, have you ever thought about writing a book?" she asked. Imani looked surprised. "A book?" "Yes," the librarian said kindly. "Your story is important, can help others understand and feel less alone." Imani thought about it. Maybe she could write about the things she had seen, the people she had met, and the courage she had found inside herself. That night, she opened her journal again. This time, she began writing not just about her day, but about the journey she was on, the fear, the hope, the strength. She wrote about Officer Brooks, Jaden, and Miss Edna. She wrote about justice, kindness, and truth. As the months passed, Imani's story continued to inspire many. Community leaders invited her to speak at events. Police officers started to see her as a bridge between two worlds. And though she was still just a little girl, her voice was growing louder, carrying hope across the city. But not everything was easy. Some people still doubted her. Some police officers resented the changes. Imani sometimes felt lonely. The weight of her courage was heavy. There were nights she cried quietly, missing the innocence she once had. Through it all, Miss Edna was her rock. She reminded Imani that being brave didn't mean never being afraid. It meant standing up even when you were scared. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Imani sat on her porch with Miss Edna. They watched the stars begin to twinkle, Grandma. Imani said softly, "Do you think things will ever be different for people like me?" Miss Edna smiled gently. "Change takes time, baby, but you've already started it. You've planted seeds that will grow even when you're not looking." Imani nodded, feeling the truth in those words. And so, little black girl, who once pointed at a police officer in court, continued to grow in strength, in voice, and in hope. Her story was no longer just about fear and pain. It was about courage, healing, and the promise of a better tomorrow.